Cater for expansions! Hello and welcome to another review for the Broken Meeple, and today is another small box expansion for another great game. Today it is Quadropolis Public Services. Now, Quadropolis was a really cool city building game from last year. In fact, I'll show you it right now. Here it is. This one was a particular favourite of mine from last year. It is really simple, it is good gateway level, great for families. Any new gamer has been able to pick this up, and if you don't want to play the classic version, you can always jump it up to expert level, which just adds that nice little bit of depth for gamers to enjoy as well. It's wonderfully produced. It had one of the best base game inserts I've ever seen. We'll get onto that a little bit later. But really enjoyed it. This was like a one-hit wonder for this designer, I think, and it was really good. I thought this was a well-designed game, and it has been in my collection ever since I played it. Well, expansions were a great thing to hear about, so when they announced Quadropolis, and announced that there was going to be expansions, then it really did sort of sing home that I wanted to get them, because I figured, this could be a bit like Dice City, lots of little expansions to improve an already great game. Well, we'll get onto this a little bit later, but for now, let's talk about a quick overview of what's in the box. Public Services improves on the public service buildings from the original game of Quadropolis. Normally, when you build a public service building, you're trying to get one in each corner to score points. Now, when you build a public service building, you can instead discard it in order to build one of these specialist buildings instead. Essentially, what they do is that they grant victory points at the end of the game based on various criteria, and this could be anything from getting complete rows of harbours, to having parks in your city, to having tower blocks, to having factories next to the particular building, and some of them will just simply give you more people or more energy units in order to put into your city. Now, there are 24 tiles in the box, but there's not 24 unique buildings. Most of them will appear in Classic, and some of them will appear only in Expert, but you'll also find that some of them are simply just variations on the Classic. Like, for example, the fire station from the Classic mode will give you 2 VPs for each factory adjacent to the fire station, and the fire station for Expert mode simply scores 3 VPs for being next to the public, for the fire station. And, well, the only difference is that it requires 1 extra person to do. But you will find a variety of different public service buildings in this game. Some are unique only to Classic, some are unique only to Expert, but you'll find that most of them are essentially a kind of like a revamp of the one before it. Like a Classic fire station will require 1 inhabitant to use, and it will give you 2 VPs for every factory that is next to the fire station. The Expert mode simply requires 1 extra inhabitant and gives you 3 VPs for each adjacent factory. So not a lot of difference, but, 1 for one mode, 1 for another mode. And that's all this expansion has. It is literally just that. A bunch of tiles that you can use to improve on the public service buildings that you normally will have bought, and pretty much that's all there is to it. So, is it worth getting this expansion? Well, let's see what I think. Okay, when I got this expansion, I was a little bit underwhelmed. When I heard that there was an expansion coming out, I was like, oh yes, you could add a new mechanic here, you could add all sorts of different buildings, it'd be really great. And then I saw how small the box was, and I thought, okay, so not expecting a ton, but let's see what it's got. And then I heard about it, and it was effectively, okay, you've just brought in a few extra buildings. You pull in a Dice City here, you're just bringing everything out in drips and drabs. And so my expectations went down a little bit. But still, the expansion itself is still quite fun. The public service buildings were never the most entertaining thing in the base game, just get one in every corner. But it's nice that you can actually now get rid of it and basically get a nice building that gives you more victory points at the end for different things. So it almost allows the public service buildings to help you with the strategic path that you've chosen. Like if you were already going for a lot of tower blocks and parks, well, you could grab the public service building that gives you more BPs for towers and parks, and then you could basically compound that even further. So it is nice to have that. The expansion is so simple to use that, to be honest, I could just teach this out of the gate right away. Whether I'm using classic or expert mode, there's very few additional rules that this will do. I mean, you just basically explain that you can do this extra thing with the public service buildings, and you explain each one as they come out. And most of them will be pretty self-explanatory from the iconography. And that's literally it. It doesn't require much additional setup, but let's get to the elephant in the room. The storage. This comes in a small box. Now, you're not going to slip this inside your base game box, we all know this. But the base game of Quadropolis had one of the best inserts I had seen in any board game. It was perfectly laid out so that you could put the score pad in one section. In fact, let me get the box for you and just sort of show you. Let's get rid of those tiles. We'll come back to those in a second. But the box allowed you to put all the architects for each player in a separate cubbyhole. The tiles that you used for rounds 1, 2, 3 and 4, if you were just playing normal classic mode, allowed you to lay them all out in its own little row, and you could separate the expert and the classic only tiles in their own little bit, and setup was literally for a round, plonk, shuffle. That was all it was. So simple. And then when you wanted to tidy things up, you just collected up the tiles and just went lip, shunk. And that was it. Perfect. Brilliant. Loved it. And if you wanted expert mode, then you had the expert mode tiles here, and you had level 5 architects, to use with the various things. The 2 pawns sat nicely in there, those 2 little pawns. The score pad went in here, and these cool things, the inhabitants and the energy units tucked in nicely underneath the score pad. Well, you can't do that anymore because somebody didn't allow room for the expansion. There's no actual row for these new tiles. So when you're actually having to package this game, you're now having to think, well, hang on, what do I do? Now, some of you actually kept some of these, these are little punch-out boards for the original game, so that when you stored it vertically, some of these things didn't fall out. I kind of made a mistake and forgot to do that, so I used those little boards I've just shown you to kind of prop it up a bit more. But I wanted a good setup. I wanted like a row for these things. I wanted to be able to put these tiles in, all these nice new tiles, but I can't because there's no space. So what I've had to do, and this is the only way I've managed to do it, is this cubbyhole here where I put the Meeples and energy units. They now house the tiles, all 24 of them. They are stacked in sort of like stacks of 5 or 6. They're laid in there, and the score pad goes on top of that. Works fine. They stay in there. There's no popping up. It doesn't pop the lid or anything. And then these basically have to sit on top of this insert in bags along with all the various boards and that. It's not the end of the world. I mean, I'm probably making a bit of a mountain out of a molehill of this, but it's just when you build such a great insert, why don't you take the time to make certain that they can cater for expansions? Now, you could flip this on its head and you could do a whole discussion episode on this sort of thing, because if they allow too much empty space for expansions, then you get a lot of people who will say, oh, well, I might not want the expansion. You've just made this box bigger than it needs to be, and there's an argument to and for each of them. You could argue it one way, you could argue it the other. Personally, I'm happy for them to leave empty space for expansions as long as they bring out the expansions and make certain they're good, because then you don't have to worry about a bigger box later on. But then, again, devil's advocate, you could make the argument that you should build a small box to begin with, and then when you bring out an expansion, bring it out in a larger box. Though I would argue that because you don't necessarily know how many expansions you're going to do, you might have to continuously make bigger boxes, and that would probably be expensive. But again, that's a discussion topic for maybe another day, or maybe a podcast episode, who knows. The expansion itself is still good fun though. These tiles, it's the same great quality, and I do like the fact that even though it's not 24 unique tiles, which is a bit of it's a bit of a misleading term on the box because it just says 24 tiles. It doesn't say more like 12, and some of them are duplicates. It is a little bit of a misnomer on that, but it's nice to have these because what I do like about it is that it gives you alternative victory goals, or it adds to the victory path you'd already chosen. Like, I mean, let me have a look at some of them here. This one, just gives you a victory point and some energy units. Okay, fine, nothing major, but sometimes you need more energy, and of course, it's another public service building for the endgame scoring. But then there's ones like, you get an extra, you get meeples in your shops. You get, you manage to get victory points if you fill up all the corners of the board, so all the sections. You can have, 1 victory point for every public service building, so, collect the whole set, why not? You can have lots of energy units, you can have lots of inhabitants. There's a nice little bit of variation, and I do like it that they've catered for classic and expert mode as well. I find myself playing classic mode a lot more than expert mode with this, because I'm usually teaching it to new gamers, and to be fair, I still like classic mode, so I've got no problem with it. It's still a great fun game, and the expansion does help to make it better. I was just kind of expecting a little bit more, that's the only thing. I thought, this is a great game that you could expand, and to just get a small box with a few tiles, it's a little underwhelming, even though it's not the most expensive game again. It's a bit like that Onitama Sensei's Path I did the other time, where it's not that much of a breaker of your pocket, but, it's there, it's small, and you're going to have to just sort out your own means of storing it. I have a feeling that because they've made a big deal about putting the symbol on the edge of the box for public service buildings, I think we're going to be seeing more of these down the line. So you might get a box next time that's all about the factories. So instead of building a normal factory, you could build one of the upgraded factories that does all sorts of other things. If that's true, I quite like the sound of that, because eventually down the line you could have like a big gamers version where you had all these different buildings you could upgrade, or maybe you just had to cherry pick some of them. I don't know if that's the route they're going, because imagine the game if all the different types had special buildings and then you tried to use them all at once. It would get a little bit cluttered at that point, but who knows? That's just speculation. I don't know what Days of Wonder have planned. I didn't even think they were going to do an expansion to the game in the first place, and then look what they got here. I guess I was just expecting a little bit more. It's a little underwhelming for what it is. I certainly don't think it's essential. This adds to the public service buildings, but there was nothing really wrong with them before. The game was nice and simple, nice and streamlined. This just adds a little bit more variety to the base game that was already decent enough as it is. I just probably would have liked a little bit more, and I wish that they'd thought a bit more about the insert, but it's a small niggle. I can get round it, but the more of these expansions they bring out, the more that insert's going to get less and less useful, and that's a damn shame because it's such a nice insert. I do like it. Such a good design, and that's what you do with it. But, oh well, like I said, little gripes like that. So, the expansion is fine. It's worth getting if you enjoy Quadropolis, but don't think that this is like a must-buy. You can get by without it if you don't play it that often, but if you're a fan of the game, then I suggest getting it. It will still be enjoyable and still worth having. But of course, just remember, you're going to have to store it in a slightly more messy way than what you're used to with everything else. So I'm going to give Quadropolis Public Services a pretty decent 6 out of 10. I think it's a fine expansion. It's not what I was hoping for. I thought it would be a little bit more involved. It's still got some nice buildings, but again, there's not a huge amount of variety. Some of them are just repeats from mode to mode, and I guess I was just expecting more. It's still decent, still worth getting if you're a fan of the game, but otherwise, you can pass it by and you wouldn't really notice it wasn't there. So, like I say, that's it for Quadropolis Public Services. Take care, I'll see you on the next Broken Meeple review, and remember everyone, it's only a game. Take care.